So today we're talking through every unit in the Adeptus Sororitas, and for this one I'm joined by a very special guest in Dees.
Hello darlings, I'm Christian von Carmian. I have been playing 40k since 2nd edition. I know quite a lot about the Battle Sisters in all of their iterations. So we have to teach you about all the units and how amazing they are.
Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Battle Sisters, and in this video myself and the excellent Christian von Carmian will be going through each and every unit in Codex Adeptus Sororitas, and in the Christian von Carmian video we couldn't get away without doing the legends as well. Obviously an enormous thank you to Christian for joining me for this one. I'm sure most Sisters players will be very well aware of him already, but if for some reason his channel's passed you by, he has an absolutely enormous amount of great content for 40k's favourite nuns with guns. It's always very special to be able to talk through one of the 40k factions with a true faction expert player. The idea for this one is that we'll be talking through each unit in the roster. I'll start out for each unit, talking briefly about what they do and how they function in game, give them a rough score out of 5 for gameplay, and a rank out of 3 for looks and rule of cool. Then I'll hand over to Christian for taking things next level, any other subtleties, interesting ways to play, or all the other stuff that only a faction expert player is going to know, so hopefully we can all learn a bit about the army.
It is currently 3 AM. Auspex Tactics is not asleep. And tonight's sleep paralysis demon is Christian von Carmian. Come to quiz him on Adeptus Sororitas. Allow our calming British voices to soothe your day.
So beginning our journey into the most faithful of 40k codexes, first up we have the standard Battle Sister squad, and this one will mainly go through infantry units, then vehicles, then characters, and then finish up with the legends of the faction. For the rank and file of the Sisters, the standard Battle Sister squad are 105 points. For that you get 10 Sisters with bolters, plus a few special weapons, offering inferno pistols, melter guns and multi-melters being popular. But what really makes these girls good are their special rules, basically really good manipulation of the miracle dice, and in particular getting sticky objectives as well, which is something that just about every army in 40k wants. They're really quite popular to turn up in competitive lists as a result, often split with a multi-melter into 2 smaller squads, so you can have the more aggressive squad going forward with some special weapons, and then maybe a more grunt squad with some basic bolters holding down a home field objective, putting sticky objectives on that, and that gives you some good options for moving off it and other screening things later in the game. Beyond that, the miracle dice are certainly interesting. The Simulacrum Imperialis farming up some miracles, and the Cherub making you feel better about feeding miracles into melter guns. Obviously they've got a vast amount of character support and can run with various different combos. Could be handy if you just want a cheapish retinue for a fighty character in Hallowed Martyrs. Overall nice to see the basic infantry having a good role within the army. I've given them a 4.5 out of 5 for in-game strength, and for the lore model and overall cool factor I've given them the full 3 out of 3. I really enjoyed the plastic resculpts of these. I feel like they did incredibly well with them, and they're about the most iconic Sisters units that you can imagine.
Right, the Battle Sisters. The basic Battle Sister squad. They get your miracle dice. They're a cheap unit compared to a lot of others, they have sticky objectives, and they can do damage. As they are objective control too, they can bully other units off objectives. We're not charging enemy units on objectives, we're just walking forward and sitting there. They are a battle line unit, the only battle line unit we have in the Sisters roster. That is exceptional for all of the mission decks that give you a battle line bonus. Pariah Nexus had various mission rules that gave a bonus to your battle line units, and the battle line bonus in the 2025-2026 mission deck is that in Incursion, your unit can perform an action and shoot, or perform an action and advance. This is why we want Battle Sisters, especially at lower points games. 60 Battle Sisters is not a madman's army list. It works. It works. They're a really good unit. They can have 2 characters and are the only unit that can have 2 characters. Maybe you want someone who's going to protect your character in the Hallowed Martyrs, but in the Army of Faith, if you have a Dialogus and a Palatine, and you can put 2 miracle dice into the unit because of the Army of Faith detachment rule, your multi-melter can fire Overwatch, automatically hit because every miracle dice is changed to a 6 for the Dialogus, which is an automatic wound because the Palatine gives you lethal hits, and at AP -4, that may mean no save for the enemy. You can do that twice because of the Army of Faith. That's 2d6 +2/+2 damage to an enemy unit that just tried to move closer to you. It can destroy Carnifexes, it can destroy Predators. It's very upsetting for the enemy to learn that you can do this. And then you do it. and it's great. To split a Battle Sister squad with an Immolator is a great option, but if you have an Immolator, you probably want to split the Dominions. Then you get more special weapons for your squad that's going in the Immolator. The other 5 sisters with bolters can stay on the objective, and Dominions still have the Simulacra Imperialis to generate miracle dice. Whereas the Battle Sisters would want to be able to stick to the objective and move on because they are the defenders of the faith. I also think the Battle Sister squad is a 4.5 out of 5. They get compared to Dominions a lot, and I've done a video on my channel comparing Battle Sisters to Dominions. Sometimes the Battle Sisters are better, sometimes the Dominions are better. It can vary. But for lore, for cool factor, these are the Battle Sisters. It's an absolute 3 out of 3, the highest you can get. And their poses very much are keyed to look like the older Metal Battle Sister models, of which I have quite a lot. Very cool that you can still make Battle Sister pulling grenade pin before throwing it. I love them a lot.
Talking of Dominions, next up we have the Battle Sisters with the special weapons, built with the same kit as the Battle Sister squad and quite a similar unit with different special weapons and special rules. They scout 6 inches forward, and you can either take 4 melter guns or 4 Ministorum flamers in the unit, so pretty excellent for getting first strikes on the enemy with heavier special weapon fire, though you do have the trade out of having lower OC and not having that rather godly sticky objectives rule. Overall, between that, they feel like a solid rival. You could still have a split squad in an Immolator, camping down on an objective and farming up miracle dice. And their bonus special rule is another very good one as well. Righteous Awareness allowing a d6 reactive move if the enemy moves up to counter them, which just occasionally might be enough to save a squad's life. For gameplay power, I've given them a 4 out of 5. I would rate them just a little behind the standard Battle Sisters, given the sticky objectives rule. I say that's got a little more value than the Scouts and the reactive move, but they're both very good and very usable units, maybe Dominions having a bit more draw in Bringers of Flame. For overall cool factor, I've given them a 2.5 out of 3, pretty much just as good as the Battle Sisters really. They use the same models and having more exciting special weapons is no bad thing.
The Dominions do a lot into most detachments. The Simulacrum is great for generating more miracle dice, and you have Scout and with Holy Vanguard even with non-Scout characters in transports. So your Palatine with the Dominions in an Immolator can still Scout, even though the Palatine doesn't have Scout. You have your reactive move, and you can use the reactive move to embark in a transport. That's especially useful when you want to get into and out of transports in the Bringers of Flame detachment. That's a very transport-focused detachment. They can have melter weapons, they can have flamers. Don't forget the Storm Bolters. Damage 2 Storm Bolters are very good at killing Space Marines and all kinds of infiltrating units that you'll be scouting towards. Many of them have 2 wounds, like Pure Strain Gene Stealers, Space Marine Scouts, Tau Infiltrator Stealth Suits, and that 2 damage helps you get through the feel no pain of infiltrating Poxwalkers. They have Assault to advance and shoot on most of their weapons, so they don't need that Bringers of the Flame bonus, but the Dominion Superior, who often wants to have a Hand Flamer, will now get that Assault because of the Bringers of Flame bonus. Otherwise, regular Battle Sisters often prefer the Bringers of Flame more than Dominions because then they get the Assault to match up with the Dominions. In gameplay terms, I think they're about the same with the Battle Sisters. A 4.5 is good, and I would give them 3 out of 3. I know Dominions are just, hey, back in the day we didn't really have many units, so what if we had Battle Sisters but it was just the Special Weapons unit? That's fine, I'm fine with that. We now have an advancing fast attack unit as it used to be called. Same models to make them out the Battle Sisters, it's basic Battle Sisters, but they're doing more cool things. 3 out of 3 from me.
Next up, we've got the sisters that bring some seriously heavy firepower with the Retributor squad. They've often been one of the primary damage dealers of the sisters in the past. Options of heavy bolters, heavy flamers, and multi-melters. I've been more tempted by the multi-melters than others to try and bring down tough stuff. I've certainly seen people use the big strength 6 heavy flamers as well, though they can be some fairly punchy Overwatch. They do cost a big 115 points for really quite a fragile unit, ideally wanting to be transported up and get the Alpha Strike on something. And the datasheet rule gives them a solid damage buff, no matter whether or not they get the boosted version or not, re-rolling hit rolls of 1 or wound rolls of 1, and then they get +1 to hit and wound against something that's destroyed an Adept Sororitas unit earlier in the game. Again, they feel like a particularly standout one for the Bringers of Flame, allowing them to move around the board faster and having some nice synergies with transports. Overall, for in-game strength, I still feel like they're maybe a little bit behind the curve compared with some of the other sisters. I've given them a 3 out of 5 here. They do more damage, but given extra support squads that could be split with Immolators, I'd probably rate the Dominions or Battle Sisters higher for transport content, and the sisters have got no shortage of other good damage dealers out there as well. For lore and core factor though, I've given them the full 3 out of 3 once more. Battle Sisters obliterating the enemy with heavy melter fire just feels like it's got a ton of fun factor to me.
You make a very good point about the Immolators. The reason to have an Immolator is to split a unit in half, which it can only do with Battle Sisters, Dominions, and Novitiates. Retributors would just go inside, which is kind of a waste of an Immolator. And the Retributors being only a squad of 5, not being able to go into a squad of 10, means they probably need some kind of support just to stop them from being instantly killed. Once you add a Rhino, then they're nearer the points value of a Paragon Warsuit unit. They did get a change to their special rule, so they get to reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1, or if avenging a unit, +1 to hit and +1 to wound instead. There are no full rerolls. And when heavy gives you a better to hit chance, it's sort of an anti-synergy, because you're getting +1 to hit, which doesn't stack with +1 to hit. So ideally you want to remain stationary and shoot a unit that hasn't destroyed one of your Battle Sister units already. But more likely what you want to do is arrive from reserves or disembark from a transport. They were very good in the Bringers of Flame detachment for disembarking really, really close, but now that that detachment rule is 6 inches, it's not as good, and the stratagems required to make them work well cost more command points. It is far too expensive for the same cost as a squad of 10 Dominions. If you want heavy bolters, choose a Castigator or a Mortifier. If you want the Flamers to do Overwatch, use Dominions or the Sanctifiers instead, so you really have to build this unit with multi-melters. For tabletop play, I would give them a 2 out of 5, and for lore and models and the cool factor, it's a 1 out of 3. They're great for being Battle Sisters with big weapons, they're good in the lore, but the box is really bad. It's 5 models for about the same price as 10 models, and the sprue only comes with 2 multi-melters, 2 heavy flamers, and 2 heavy bolters. So you can't build the full good unit with the 4 multi-melters from one box.
Next up, we're on to the Elite of the Sisters with the Celestian Sacresants. They certainly started out 10th edition being rather underwhelming, but between some equipment boosts and a fairly big recent points cut, they've got rather next level since then. You can take them in 5s for 70 points, though most seem to take them in 10s for 130. That gets you 10 Elite Battle Sisters with 1 wound and a 4+ invulnerable save, a good special rule for -1 to wounds to make the squad tankier, and then your choice of either the Anointed Halberds or the Hallowed Bases, both of which I feel like are fairly well balanced and do genuinely have their advantages. With that cheaper 130 point cost, they've become a pretty central unit in Champions of Faith. It was an enormously big win for them when you no longer have to burn miracle dice to make them righteous. I think OC2 is pretty helpful for at least a somewhat durable Sisters unit for the points cost, and they do have access to some pretty good damage dealer stratagems in that one as well. I've often seen them run with either Canoness combos with other characters, or perhaps the Hospitaller, and I feel like they do quite a good job of being a sort of medium threat bully unit, able to handle a lot of lighter targets, particularly infantry ones in the game, and doing so at a pretty reasonable points cost with a character attached, often around about the 200 points mark or so. For gameplay, I've given them a 5 out of 5 for this one, maybe a little bit on the generous side. And for lore and cool factor, I did quite like Veteran Sisters with power weapons and big shields. I've given them a 2.5 out of 3 here.
Celestian Sacresants have gotten a lot better. They're a unit that very much needs a character because their unit special rule gives enemies -1 to wound them as long as they have a character. That leaves you open for some shenanigans with Junith, as they can be -1 to hit and then -1 to be wounded, or more likely you want to cause damage by having a Palatine or a Canoness, or you want to have an absolute brick that is -1 to be wounded and has a 5+ feel no pain from a Hospitaller, and you can resurrect Battle Sisters. You can only have 1 character in this unit because the Battle Sister squad is the only squad that can have 2 characters. As an Anvil, it's still not that amazing because you're going to wound them with most attacks on the 4+, and Celestian Sacresants have only 1 wound. They work okay in Hallowed Martyrs, they do work very well in the Champions of Faith. Those are the tournament-used detachments right now. You can have them work in the Army of Faith to be -1 to hit with a stratagem, and have an extra point of armor penetration on the mauls to match the halberds with a different stratagem, but in Champions of Faith they work very well if picked to be righteous, and then go to the Heart of Heresy for +1 strength and an extra point of armor penetration. Because they only work well in a couple of good detachments, even if they are our best detachments right now, I give them a 3 out of 5. They don't have the versatility to be used in more detachments and more armies and more styles of army that other Battle Sister units do. For cool and lore and models, I give it a 2 out of 3. I was asking Games Workshop to give Celestians with combat weapons, however, I was not expecting Games Workshop to remove Celestians with guns. Celestians with guns were great. Celestians with guns were the elite unit that fires lots of guns, and they're cool and fire guns. What's that? Oh, we're only on for 2 hours, not for 6 hours. Okay, yeah, I miss Celestians with guns. And Celestian Insidiants are not out yet, so we cannot comment on them. That's going to be 2026.
Next up, we have the Avenging Angels from the Sky, the Seraphim squad. Sisters with deep strike and dual pistols, often fielded with maximal hand flamers. They can stack a fairly silly amount of strength 4 hits on an enemy unit out of deep strike if they want to. At just 80 points, they can be really quite a nice skirmishing and trading unit, jumping up the board 12 inches, frying a secondary or objective skirmish unit with their pistols, and then fade away 6 inches with their move shoot move. They're a squad with a whole bunch of options. Against armies with lesser board control, you could deep strike them. Against armies that don't, you could easily start them on the board and have multiple units running up on the flanks. Again, they get quite a lot out of the Bringers of Flame, though nowhere near as much as when the Codex dropped. Overall though, still really quite a solid objective skirmish unit, particularly after they drop the points just a touch. They can be fun in other detachments such as the Army of Faith as well, and overall I've given them a 4 out of 5 for gameplay, and the full 3 out of 3 for lore model and cool factor. I feel like there's not much more Battle Sisters than Avenging Angels swooping down on wings of fire.
The Seraphim are excellent in every detachment as a small squad of 5 to deep strike and complete your secondary missions. Or, especially in the Bringers of Flame and the Army of Faith, they work well as a unit of 5 or 10 on the table. In the Bringers of Flame, as a unit of, say, 5, they can move very fast. They move 12 inches, then you advance them. And as they have assault from the Bringers of Flame detachment rule, then you shoot, then they move again. That can get you all the way up the table. Hit and run, or just speedy objective takers. In the Army of Faith, you can string them out, and using Blinding Radiance, your entire army could be -1 to be hit in the shooting phase. And then, when required, you can move up the board and counterattack with Hand Flamers or Inferno Pistols. If you can get those Inferno Pistols within 3 inches, you can do a lot of damage. The points reduction recently was to make the Army of Faith a little bit more viable, especially after the nerfs to the Bringers of Flame, which stopped them being as viable. In the Bringers of Flame, people used to drop in and use Cleansing Flames, and with a 12-inch detachment rule, your Hand Flamers were Strength 5, your Bolt Pistols were Strength 5, and you could cause a lot of devastating wounds with Cleansing Flames. That was up to 9 Hand Flamers if you included a Canoness with a Hand Flamer and a power weapon. That can be a lot of devastating wounds. That's a tank melting amount of devastating wounds. It's still valid to do with a Canoness who will reduce that 2 command points down to 1 command point, but you won't get the bonus strength on all of the dice that didn't roll a 6. Having them run up the board is also something that works. And people should think about that more. They get a 5 out of 5 for gameplay, for being valid and usable in all of the detachments in a lot of different ways. For lore, for cool, that's a 2 out of 3. It's the pose that lets them down with the flight stand, and the way the models are angled, meaning sometimes you can't actually tell from the way they're built which way they're meant to be flying. And that feels a bit weird to me. But they're good.
Next up, we have their close combat counterparts in the Zephyrim squad, both handing out your prophecies and also a whole load of melee damage with their power swords. They move fast and can deep strike like the Seraphim. Potentially they could get into melee with some rapid ingress, jumping down behind terrain if they wanted to. And when they hit home in close combat, they can hit hard with a whole bunch of power weapon attacks, both boosted by sustained hits and lethal hits at the same time when they make a charge move. Again, they dropped in points in the last update, which is a fairly necessary change, and I feel like it's done enough to make them usable but still not really stand out. They are just a bit limited with mass damage 1 attacks, not having quite so much threat against really big tough targets with multi-wounds and high toughness values. They're definitely interesting though, and you could have certain melee combos with a Canoness with jump pack or Celestine leading them, I suppose. For gameplay factor, I feel like they're usable but maybe not crazy standout. I haven't seen them in so many competitive lists. I've given them a 3.5 out of 5. And for lore model and cool factor, I've given them a 2.5 out of 3. Again, all very fun angelic sisters, though I feel like the Seraphim are the ones that I think of first when I think sisters jump packs.
The Zephyrim have been made cheaper than before, but 80 points for 5 still isn't great compared to Marines with jump packs for 90 points. They still have the aura for the Army of Faith stratagems, but Seraphim can do it better. I like their lethal hits, I like their sustained hits, and those weapon abilities are now extended to all characters. It isn't limited to power weapons anymore. That's a bigger boost for Celestine and the jump Canoness who may want a halberd. There is less need to rapid ingress the Zephyrim as they have a sacred banner to reroll charges. From experience, do not rely on 9-inch charges even if you can re-roll them. But if you had them near the Triumph of St. Katherine, now you have a re-rollable 8-inch charge. They can get in there. I think their best stratagem is Righteous Vengeance. Because they have lethal hits and or sustained hits, Righteous Vengeance gives you full re-rolls to hit. You can get more lethal hits to get through the enemy's toughness. Think of them less as a unit in themselves, though you can have a unit of 5 do the same thing as the Seraphim, drop in, complete secondary missions. They're a good delivery method for characters, especially the Canoness with Jump Pack. But at the same price as Seraphim, I prefer Seraphim. I'll give the Zephyrim a 3 out of 5, no, let's say a 4 out of 5, then we're still behind the Seraphim. For lore and cool factor and the models, I'd say a 2 out of 3. I think it's the helmets that let them down. How do you put the visor up when you have the big spiky thing on the back?
Next up we have the Stealthy Sisters of the Sisters Novitiate. Originally a kill team kit, being repackaged for Warhammer 40k this week it seems. They're 100 points for a unit of 10 sisters infiltrating into the midboard with some high OC. And just having the infiltrate keyword in the first place is quite a big win for just about any 40k army. It means that you can pin back enemies' infiltrators and scouts, and you gain a lot of board control straight away. Plus they could be in a position to either score early game secondary objectives, or even do some big move block things if they move up to the front of the army and sacrifice themselves. Their actual damage output is a little bit limited, but you'd probably expect it to be. Maybe alright at bullying some very lighter infantry close by. They're very slightly better against things on objectives with their special rule. Overall, I would rate them as strong, though literally just for the infiltrator ability really. They're not a unit I'd be tempted to take more than one of personally. I've given them a 4 out of 5 for gameplay. I'm not sure if that's maybe a little bit generous. They do feel like they're paying more of a premium for the infiltrate compared with certain faction special rules, but it is enough to see them included in a whole bunch of top lists. For lore and cool factor, I've given them a 2 out of 3. I feel like they're pretty fun with all their fun special weapons, though the kit itself is fairly godly with the sheer amount of different options it has. You can kit bash a massive amount of sisters characters from it if you want to.
The Novitiates do have a great job, much like the Space Marine Scouts, of infiltrating to block enemy infiltrators. It seems the Imperium loves to train their newest recruits by throwing them first into the enemy. I think the best thing to do with Novitiates is to split them with an Immolator. Half of the squad will infiltrate to deny the enemy infiltrators, the other half will go in the Immolator with a Palatine. She loves to have the reroll to charge from the Sacred Banner, she loves reroll hit rolls of 1. Because the Palatine has those rapturous blows, the more successful wounds she has, the more mortal wound she causes. And with lethal hits, every 1 that turns into a 6 is another mortal wound. The Novitiate Simulacrum will also generate miracle dice. And maybe they can complete secondary missions turn 1, especially on the center of the board, until they die, and 5 Dead Sisters generates a miracle dice on death. They are a 4 out of 5 for rules, and a 3 out of 3 because as long as that new reboxed version of the Novitiates has that character sprue with the Hospitaller parts, the Dogmata parts, the Dialogus parts, it is a brilliant kit to make all of the characters you will ever need and avoid the expensive Games Workshop character tax. I mean the literal money which comes with taxes, because they're so expensive to buy characters individually.
Next up we have the already angry disgraced sisters of the Sisters Repentia, charging into battle with no power armour, but desire for atonement and an enormous eviscerator. They move slightly faster than regular battle sisters, and hit with a bunch of strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 attacks with sustained hits 1. They don't have a huge amount of volume of attacks, but a whole load of those should convert. Rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls is pretty tasty, and it is a unit that can take any sort of melee buffs from other detachments rather well, provided it's not just overlapping with those exact same rules. Currently they're 75 points for a unit of 5, though they pay a increased tax of 160 for a unit of 10 of them, which is a bit on the painful side. They'll likely need a Rhino to get them where they need to be, so going to be a bit more expensive than that, and when they charge in they should have a solid chance of messing up any one thing, but then they're going to die very easily indeed after that. Between all that, it doesn't really seem like they've been all that popular in the more recent era of Sisters lists. I've given them a 3 out of 5. I don't think that they're unusable, but maybe a bit overshadowed by the other damage dealers due to their fragility. For their lore models and cool factor, I feel like they've got some pretty awesome backstory, though I feel like I don't really like the models quite as much as the Power Armoured Sisters, just personally. I've given them a 2 out of 3 there.
The Repentia had a little bit of a points drop, but they're still too expensive compared to the basic Marines and other equivalent models in other factions, at the same cost for 1 wound and a 6+ invulnerable save. While you can be an absolutely jammy sword and pass a lot of armor saves by assigning them to the superior, they have a 3+ save, just that one model. Don't assign wounds to the superior. Then you lose your rerolls to hit and your rerolls to wound. With that, you can tear apart a demon. Well, we don't call them demons. Maybe a Hellbrute. That's something that we can say we actually killed without the Grey Knights coming. Or you'll kill 9 out of 10 Khorne Berserkers. It's a unit for the Penitent host mostly. The Champions of Faith is a decent option. They can have +1 movement, and then they go up to 8-inch movement just from being righteous, but then they can use the stratagems. And in Hallowed Martyrs, you can have full rerolls to hit if you lost your superior. You also have Fight on Death. No characters can join this unit outside of the Penitent host, where you need to use the Catechism of Divine Penitence enhancement, possibly on a Palatine, or in a Jump Pack Canoness. Then you have a model that can go slightly ahead of the unit and make their charge much easier. Otherwise, they want a Rhino to get them into the fight without exploding, or strategic reserves and a lucky miracle dice. They need more of a points drop, or the Penitent host needs to be improved. I think there are 3 out of 5 in gameplay terms, but for models, they get a 3 out of 3. They're not as boobacious as the previous metal models. They're here to kill, not to entertain, and I like that the current models reflect that. Boobacious is definitely a word.
They're not the only melee-crazed Penitent units that you can throw at the enemy though. The Arco Flagellants are heavily cyborgized by the Ministorum, again moving fast at the enemy with a 7-inch move, being a bit more of a chunky unit that's harder to take down with 2 wounds apiece, and they still get the 5+ feel no pain. And when they slam into the enemy, they get an enormous amount of attacks with their Arco Flails, so 4 per model at Strength 5, AP 0, and Damage 1. If they're going into anything they're not going to be wiping out straight away, it's almost certainly worth triggering their Extremist trigger word, giving them 6 attacks each. And if the targets they're going into don't have a toughness of 10 or a seriously good armor save, they're probably going to get buried under weight of attacks. They can be quite a nice unit in Hallowed Martyrs, with Righteous Vengeance giving them rerolls to hit, which is pretty massive for something that hits on a 4+, and could be an interesting enough unit to do some melee shenanigans, forcing enemies to attack one unit to escape retribution. Overall, I feel like they do their job well, clearing infantry rather well, and then being something just a little bit tougher to take down than the average Sisters unit, even if not crazily so. I've given them a 4 out of 5 for in-game strength at the moment. I have given them a 1.5 out of 5 for their model and overall feel. Again, I feel like the Repentia, they've got some pretty fun and grimdark lore. Though for the Battle Sisters aesthetic, I just prefer the Power Armoured Sisters for the most part myself.
One of the great benefits of the Arco Flagellants is being able to be taken in squads of 3 as well as squads of 10. As a squad of 3, they can screen, they can sit on an objective, they can die and give you a miracle dice early on when we are starved for miracle dice. They are, of course, ideal for the Penitent host. As you say, Mr. Tactics, although we're on first-name terms, Auspex. They're great for the Hallowed Martyrs. I found they also work in the Army of Faith. Then you can use Faith and Fury to get Lance, and as long as they kill at least one model, which they should, you get a miracle dice. They also have Divine Guidance. That can boost your armor penetration to -1, which is enough when you're taking a lot of saves on something like Space Marines. And if they kill one, you get a miracle dice. A unit of 10 is really effective at taking out the enemy hordes, Zangors, Hormigants. Use the Extremist trigger word, because you can survive failing that hazardous test, because it's 3 mortal wounds, and that can be saved on their Feel No Pain and 2 wounds. More recently, the meta of Knights and Toughness 6 Death Guard has not been kind to their Strength 5 attacks. Repentia cut into bigger targets better, and also with AP -2, and they also do alright with hordes. But with their versatility as a squad of 3, especially if you're not using Crusaders or Death Cult Assassins, they're a 4 out of 5 in gameplay, but a 1 out of 3 in the models. The models are okay if you're fine with body horror. I think it's more boys for the Ministorum, rather than ladies for the Adeptus Sororitas.
Next up, we've got the newest Adeptus Sororitas unit that has had its rules out there. The Sanctifiers came out in a kill team earlier in the year, and basically they're a Ministorum Zealot warband with a whole bunch of flamer attacks. You get 9 models at base in the unit, you can attach a priest if you want to. And the unit gets the scout keywords to move up towards the enemy, maybe having a bit of rivalry with Dominions if anything. They do have a similar sort of feel with their scout moves, and then getting a lot of close range fire attacks, several hand flamers and regular Ministorum flamers in the unit, and then quite a solid initial torrent punch with 2 sets of Holy Fire, all hitting at Strength 6, AP 1, Damage 2. If the squad just gets wiped out in Retribution, then the one shot isn't actually maybe the biggest weakness in the world. At 100 points though, it does feel like they're paying really quite a big tax for what they do, and have slightly more limited targets compared with other sisters. At first impressions, I just wouldn't really rate them higher than Dominions myself. If you do want special weapon units moving forward, in game I've given them a 2.5 out of 5, again not completely unusable and they could bully some lighter units out there. I've given them a 2 out of 3 for model and cool factor. I did quite like the various different Imperial Zealots being realised in this one. I'll certainly be interested to hear what you've got to say about these guys though. I was a bit uncertain as to how they fit in with the Sisters roster.
I think you are right in that they don't compare very well to Dominions, though they are cheaper Dominions with Flamers, and you get more Flamers. There are 8 torrent weapons in this unit, so that's what you want to use Overwatch on. Or in the Bringers of Flame for 2 command points, you can have devastating wounds on those torrent weapons. They can have a priest. They don't need a priest for better combat because they're not a combat unit. One of their big advantages is the Salvationist to recover D3 models, so if they're not wiped out, and they are very easy to wipe out, then they will recover and keep going. I've given them a 2 out of 5, then a 2 out of 3 for lore, model, and cool factor. I especially like seeing the missionaries that were in metal being remade in plastic and still looking really good. But it's more lads for the Ministorum rather than ladies for the sisters.
Moving into the vehicles and armour of the Adeptus Sororitas next, and first up here we have the Penitent Engines, crazed unlucky sinners with boss blades thrown towards the enemy to cause as much suffering to the enemies of the Emperor before they're inevitably brought down. These guys are 75 points per model or 150 for a pair of them. You get a 5 wound toughness 6 vehicle with a 5+ feel no pain, so maybe at least a little bit unreliable to take down with any one batch of anti-tank shooting, though they're still not standout tough. In melee, they're often fielded with Boss Blades, and they get some fairly heavy-hitting Penitent Flamers with the Twin-Linked keyword and 2d6 attacks. If they get close, they can cause a fair amount of damage, and they're also able to advance and charge, so have a bit more of a threat range compared with Mortifiers. I feel like if you can manage to deliver them into melee with some choice targets and the average detachment, they can do alright, though I just feel like there's a danger that that might not necessarily happen if they have to try and hide behind ruins and then use their movement to get around. They might well be at least taking 1 round of firepower or so. I've given them a 2.5 out of 5 here. I'd probably rate the Mortifiers as a little bit better for the average sister detachment at the moment, though obviously they could gain a fair bit more in the Penitent Host. For the lore, model and cool factor, I've given them a 2.5 out of 3. I quite liked the resculpt of these going back to update the previous Penitent Engines in metal.
Oh, the Penitent Engines do die quite easily. And so they get redemption. Excellent! They rush in really well. What you need to do is learn where to aim them. If they can never be shot, that is the best. It is easy for them to die first turn to get a miracle dice if you do mess up, so it's not the worst. Because it's per unit that dies, we get the miracle dice. Let's not have any Penitent Engines running in squads of more than 1. It's more miracle dice this way, and also you can get the Hallowed Martyrs bonus if you take some amount of damage. Then you get +1 to hit. If you're a unit of 2, your starting strength is 2. Losing one of them means you're not below half strength, so you can never get that +1 to wound. We don't want the flails because that's too close to the Arco Flagellants, but their flamers are very special as they're both twin-linked and have twice as many shots as the average flamer. You don't often get weapons that are both twin-linked and the equivalent of 2 of their kind. Although I suppose there are actually 4 flamers, 2 pairs of twin-linked flamers for the arms. Okay, it makes perfect sense. Doesn't matter what I was saying. Carrying on. There are 4 out of 5 in gameplay terms. I believe you are right that the Mortifiers are a little bit better. And there are 2 out of 3 as a model, and in terms of lore, it's nice to have some auxiliaries for the sisters, and the metal models were an absolute pain to build and stay together. I quite like the new plastic resculpts.
Next up, we have their dual build option in the Mortifiers. These ones Penitent Sisters trapped within their torture sarcophagus things, or very disturbing indeed. As the datasheets go, they have really quite a lot of similarities. The main differences with the Mortifiers are they hit on 3s, so a bit more accuracy in melee, and they also get a pair of heavy bolters as well, so they can actually put out a fairly chunky amount of firepower per model. On top of that, they're also cheaper as well at 70 points versus 75 for the Penitent Engine. You can get an Anchorite in the unit that can get a 3+ save for a bit more durability. It does reduce their movement characteristic a bit though. Probably their biggest weakness compared with the Penitent Engines is they are slower to bring to bear. They don't get to advance and shoot or advance and charge. What they do get in their place though is the ability to fight on death on a 2+ if they're slain by a melee attack. Even with the lower threat range, I would rate them a little higher than the Penitent Engines myself. I just feel like being able to have a bit more punchy damage from longer range with those heavy bolters is handy enough to have. They can chip in pretty solidly on top of some Castigator fire. I've generally seen a few more of them using competitive lists versus Penitent Engines recently. Overall, I've given them a 3.5 out of 5 for gameplay, and for these ones I've given it a 2 out of 3 for their lore and cool factor. Out of the two, I just feel like the Penitent Engines are the more central, well-known and recognised unit, where I still can't help but see these as the multi-build kit for them.
Mortifiers are cheaper than Penitent Engines, and are tougher objective holders because of that sarcophagus. They fight on death, so if enemies come to take it from them in combat, to really seize the objective, they're gonna get buzzbladed at the same time. Probably. 2+, probably. They don't need the Penitent host to fight on death, so they're, like, top-tier versatility for all of the different kinds of detachments. I now prefer Mortifiers to Penitent Engines. Hitting on a 3+ instead of a 4+ is important. Having that 3+ save is important. Heavy bolters instead of flamers is important. Penitent Engines do not get a choice. The 4 buzzsaw attacks are nice, but not the best. It wants to be able to take out its own profile, which is heavy infantry or light vehicles. What it can do really well in the Hallowed Martyrs is Suffering and Sacrifice, a stratagem we'll be coming back to again. Enemies have to allocate their attacks to your one Mortifier instead of the more squishy, say, Battle Sisters with Objective Control 2. And if they kill the Mortifier fights on death. Because of their cheapness, because of their versatility, I think they're a 5 out of 5 unit. But for the lore, I would say a 1 out of 3. They are not Penitent Engine recognizable, and it's an extra chance for Repentia who have fled from combat. The Imperium doing second chances to have Repentia is unusual. A third chance for redemption, though only via death, that doesn't sound like the Imperium to me.
Next up, we have the holy organ of missile destruction that is the Exorcist. The slightly mad faithful artillery piece of the Sisters of Battle is a whopping 210 points to field in game at the moment. It has 2 missile options, though the regular missile launcher just seems by far the stronger one. D6 plus 2 shots at strength 10, AP minus 3, and damage D6. At least able to contribute some solid damage to just about anything that's toughness 10 or lower, at least fairly reliably. A special rule is unfortunately a bit on the niche side, handing out Battle Shock. Unless Games Workshop changes Battle Shock mechanics, it's not likely to be super relevant. Making vehicles explode on a 5+ is quite fun, but for artillery pieces, paying a big premium for their damage output, it's just maybe a little bit less likely that's going to trigger in the first place. Kind of cool if it ever does happen though. Overall, Exorcists feel like they're a casualty of Games Workshop's indirect fire this edition, with an edition so very centred on line of sight blocking terrain. If they're given a usable points cost, then they generally tend to get problematic quite fast, so they've just repeatedly jacked up the points cost on just about anything indirect, to the point where they feel really quite underwhelming to play in more casual lists. I've given the Exorcist a 2.5 out of 5 here. I feel like even for indirect fire platforms, it's a bit on the overcosted side. Not absolutely completely unusable to be able to put some pinpoint damage exactly where it needs to be, but likely needs to be played very cleverly, and even then I feel like you're probably going to be better off with other choices. For the model and cool factor though, I've got to give it the full 3 out of 3. Having a whole faithful church organ blasting rockets off into the sky to rain down upon the foe, it's all very cool.
The Exorcist is getting too expensive. It suffers from the indirect fire penalties, and we're now within 25 points of the Triumph of St. Katherine, which is kind of insane. I'm still taking one because they're wonderful, but I've never used the devastating refrain ability. Enemies are either dead, or past their battle shock, or they didn't explode. The Exorcist missiles are good. Indirect fire is good. You can hide on your home objective and fire off missiles and still cause damage. The small conflagration missiles are really useful for killing the units on the enemy home objective, like cultists, but not the regenerating or sticky objective gene stealer cultists kind of cultists. And you can knock out the Sisters of Silence that are often there for Custodes. But sending in Seraphim with hand flamers is much cheaper and more effective, and Battle Sisters generally do not struggle with killing infantry. We're great at killing cultists. It's like our whole job in the lore. The Exorcist has a decent tank profile, it's good. In the Hallowed Martyrs, it can get better if damaged. In the Army of Faith, that's where I want to have my Exorcist, because you can do 2 acts of faith per unit, per phase, so you can use 2 miracle dice on the damage. This is why I like the Exorcist's weapons compared to the Castigator's weapons. The Castigator's weapons are fixed, the Exorcist is random, and if it's random, we can manipulate it with miracle dice. If you have enough miracle dice. or you have good miracle dice. I think it's a 3.5. No, we'll say it's cool. 4 out of 5 in terms of gameplay, and naturally a 5 out of 5 in lore. It's out of 3. It's a 5 out of 3 in terms of lore. This is 40k the tank. It is religion that is weaponized, that is moving towards you at high speed and also is an artillery piece. It is not a tank that we have strapped a church to. We have vastly improved a church by sticking it on top of a tank chassis. It is beautiful and brilliant. It is the Exorcist.
Next up, we've got the Sisters' take on the Predator chassis pretty much, with the Castigator tank, this one being a bit of a counterpoint to the majority of the weapons of the Sororitas, having long range and volume fire, either with a choice of an autocannon or battle cannon on the top. I've seen far more use of the battle cannon with the Ignores cover. D6 plus 3 shots at strength 10, AP 1 and damage 3 is pretty general purpose as well. When you're getting 9 heavy bolter shots, that's enough to be threatening some small units of objective grabbers and skirmishers at the same time. It's got a fairly godly debuff rule as well. One unit that gets hit has an extra pip of AP against it, excellent for any low AP Sisters firepower, particularly things like all the flamer weapons out there, though it potentially could be best on just more Castigators. Overall, as a result, it's been a pretty ubiquitous model in Sisters lists pretty much throughout the entirety of 10th edition, well worth its 160 points, often seen in multiples. I've given it a 4.5 out of 5 in terms of in-game strength. For the lore and model factor, I feel like compared with the majority of the Sisters units, it just feels a bit less unique compared with most. I've given it a 1 out of 3 there, I'm afraid. I feel like it's just hard to rate it too good on that front when it's put next to the Immolator and the Exorcist.
The Castigator has been overcosted in the past. It got 10 points cheaper in the June 2025 balance patch, but when Exorcists were much cheaper, I would always recommend an Exorcist. Right now, the Castigators are more expensive than a Knight Armiger. That is after the Imperial Knight's points increase. So you have to factor that in when considering if you want a Castigator. The bonus AP ability is very good. 3 heavy bolters and a battle cannon or twin autocannon are also very good. An extra point of armor penetration doesn't do a lot when there's so much cover on the vast majority of tables. So you need to stack it with the Immolator, whose ability ignores cover on one enemy, otherwise that 1 point of armor penetration just disappears. So you can have a great chain of Immolator strikes, then Castigator strikes, then Exorcist strikes. Or second Castigator. I'll give it a 4 out of 5 for gameplay. It's very, very useful to have. But when it comes to the lore, it's a 0 out of 3. It looks like the inside of a sandwich, I'll get back to that, of a Leman Russ mixed with a Predator tank. It's got a bit of both, squished together from 2 other factions that isn't Battle Sisters, and now we're calling it a Battle Sister tank. I am saying it is inbred.
Getting back to more fun tanks that have parts of church carted round on them, we've got the Immolator. This one bringing an entire stained glass window to protect the gunner there apparently, as the Sisters' dedicated transport vehicle, either packing some great big immolation flamers or twin multi-melters. As we mentioned earlier, it's got a small transport capacity but has the pretty awesome ability to split a unit in half, particularly Battle Sisters, given that they can have 2 small units worth of sticky objective things going around, and then split the special weapons away from the objective grabbing squad. So it works pretty well with the other units that it's got options to do so as well. That's already good utility, but then it brings some pretty nice firepower to the board on top of that. Nice to have something with at least fairly solid threat on a unit that might not be the absolute top priority to take down for the opponent. I've seen slightly more people use the twin multi-melters than the immolation flamers, but both of them see some play. As mentioned by Christian in the last one, being able to strip cover is pretty excellent as a bonus as well. Could be nice to hit a unit with that before shooting with a Castigator with slightly lower AP, and between that you could have a serious amount of buffed firepower and bolters if you'd like to. Having multi-melters or a hunter-killer missile on the Immolator could also be quite a fun target for a miracle dice too, giving you just that one shot that you might need to take down a vehicle on low health. Overall, it's a pretty great unit, usable in just about any of the detachments, that maybe gets a bit next level in Bringers of Flame potentially. I've given it a big 4.5 out of 5 here. Excellent for getting danger units where they need to go, great for utility for the splitting units. I've given it the full 3 out of 3 for lore and cool factor once again. Again, like the Exorcist, just a model with some really fun theming.
Being able to split a unit is great. If you're not splitting a unit with your Immolator, you're using the Immolator wrong. You get a combat squad of Dominions, and they can fight, and the Dominions with a Simulacrum stay on an objective. Or you have Battle Sisters in the Immolator, and the other half can stick at the objective and then move up behind it. And it's great for splitting and transporting Novitiates, half of which are infiltrating, half of which have a character with them. Every time you have 2 separate squads of 5 Battle Sisters, that is 2 units that can be destroyed, each of which give you a miracle dice. You can only split Sisters, Dominions, and Novitiates, so you can't ever exploit, say, if Repentia were more expensive for 2 squads of 5 compared to 1 squad of 10, you couldn't put 10 Repentia in an Immolator to split them. They don't split. Sisters, Dominions, Novitiates, and the split has to be 5-5. Then you add characters after the split. So you don't get Aestred with one set and Agathae with another. The Immolator has a twin multi-melter, so you can wound enemies, especially with that twin-linked rule, whereas otherwise melter weapons are not harming vehicles in this edition, other than if you roll a 5 or a 6, or you have a miracle dice. I do like all the guns, but wish they had different points cost. Since they don't, take multi-melters. The Immolation Flamers are not awful, they auto-hit for the ability, which will remove cover. But they also have their own heavy bolter for longer range shots. If you hit with the heavy bolter, you can strip cover with that. If you hit with the Hunter-Killer Missile, which hits on a 2, which means you're going to roll a 1, so use one of those miracle dice of a 2 that is otherwise not going to be able to do anything, then you can purge and cleanse, then the enemy does not get the benefit of cover. Everyone forgets that twin heavy bolters are an option, but you shouldn't take twin heavy bolters. It's a 5 out of 5 for gameplay, 2 out of 3 for the model and the lore. I don't like the stained glass. It's hard to paint well. But I like the 2 previous versions of the Immolator. They also look very good.
Next up we have the Sisters Rhino, 75 points for the more basic no-frills transport, lacking the big gun, the splitting unit shenanigans and the stripping cover of the Immolator, but trading that out for a much bigger transport capacity. A transport capacity of 12 with a couple of firing deck points as well. So basically a much more dedicated transport where you're not paying for anything other than keeping Battle Sisters safe while they're transported to the front line. Between all that, I would say that for the points cost it probably doesn't bring quite as much value to the army as the Immolator. It could still be the right choice for some Sisters units. If you want a battlefield bunker for Repentia to launch assaults out of, they desperately need to be kept safe somehow. And you could do similar for Arco Flagellants or maybe the Scouting Sanctifiers. Between those, I feel like it does have a good role in the army. I've given it a 4 out of 5 for in-game strength, and 2 out of 3 for the lore model and cool factor. Not quite as exciting as the more themed tanks, but I don't really want to rate it too low as a pretty iconic Imperial kit.
The Rhino is the cheapest way to get a combat unit up the board without spending command points on rapid ingress. Repentia want to go inside, and Retributors can use the firing deck. You can fire 2 guns from the top, so it's like an Immolator, and since the Retributor box only has 2 multi-melters, that's what you use your 2 multi-melters on. As a transport, remember that in this edition, you can take more than 1 unit in a transport. So carry some Retributors, and also 3 Arco Flagellants, or Crusaders, or lone characters to be dropped off to complete missions. The Rhino itself is a cheap unit that doesn't die to small arms and can also complete primary and secondary and challenger missions. The Rhino gets your short-range guns to the enemy so that the Bringers of Flame detachment can work. You usually have to use vehicles to make that detachment work now, but it's doing okay when you do. Its Stormbolter is damage 1, unlike other Artificer Stormbolters that are damage 2, and it has that Hunter-Killer Missile, which will miss. I think it's a 5 out of 5 in terms of gameplay. Very underused, as more often if you want transports, people will go for the Immolator, which also splits units and also has a special rule to remove cover. But the Rhino is so much cheaper. For lore and model, I would give it a 2 out of 3. It is a bit of an older kit. I agree with what Auspex said, but I think we should protect the Rhinos where we can. They're an endangered species when the Primaris Space Marines are removing Rhinos and not able to enter them, and having weird flying grav tanks. That's a Space Marine thing, that's an Eldar thing, that's a Tau thing. What are they doing? Protect the Rhino. Hashtag save the Rhino.
Finally, for the main vehicle section, we've got the Paragon Warsuits, and the Sisters Nundan Warsuits have been really quite a powerful damage dealer throughout 10th edition, particularly taken next level post-Codex with their big special rules. For a big 210 points, you get 3 models at 4 wounds with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, most often armed with multi-melters, which work great with their Righteous Paragon special rule, giving you a +1 to hit and wound against monsters and vehicle datasheets, both at range and in melee. Between that, Morvenn Vahl's buffs, any detachment synergies, and miracle dice, they can just be an absolutely ludicrously dangerous unit. If you can ever get them in a position where they can fully activate, shoot one thing and charge down another, they could absolutely tear the heart out of an enemy army. Their melee is pretty excellent as well, particularly when augmented with Morvenn Vahl, both with rerolls and their own buffs against the right targets. Overall, just seriously strong, and pretty great in both of their more competitive detachments at the moment, with the Hallowed Martyrs being particularly good for Morvenn Vahl with the character options, particularly standing up on death, and of course being a central unit for the Champions of Faith, having access to a whole load of good stratagems and base buffs there. Overall for gameplay, I've given them a 5 out of 5, one of the single most played competitive units in Sisters lists at the moment, and for the models I've given them a 2.5 out of 3. Maybe feeling like what Games Workshop were going to go for with the Grey Knight Dread Knight, but realised quite a lot better, at least in my opinion.
The Paragon Warsuits are very fragile vehicles. They're wounded on a 5+ by common strength 4 attacks, the same as Terminators. But these are expensive Terminators, yet Terminators packing melter weapons and missiles. You almost only ever want to see or take the Paragon Warsuits as a bodyguard for Morvenn Vahl, except maybe in the Champions of Faith detachment. The Champions of Faith may see another unit of 3 that can be made righteous that can still perform very well. They're a really, really valuable unit for destroying big enemies and tanks and monsters, most of which we struggle to hurt in this edition because of the way our strength of melter weapons compares to the new toughness of tanks. Strength 9 to toughness 11 means you're wounding on a 5+. That's really hard to do unless you can get that +1 to hit and wound, unless you can get those rerolls, which is what the Paragon Warsuit with Vahl can do. Multi-melters are really good. Heavy Bolter is also pretty good with +1 to hit and wound. That's valuable. Because of their fragility, relative fragility, keep them safe until you attack. Not all the tournament lists have them, but they are common as one unit with Vahl. In terms of gameplay, they're a 5 out of 5. In terms of model and lore, it's a 0 out of 3. They are an absolute pain to build. If you look at the sister within the machine, the shoulders are in an odd place, and I don't know where the feet would go. There doesn't seem to be a place for the feet. This would not be a working warsuit in reality. I don't care about seeing feet, but it would be nice to know that people are allowed to have them.
That brings us nicely on to the Sisters character units. Let's go through the epic heroes first then, starting with Morvenn Vahl, and then talk through the generic character datasheets. As mentioned, Morvenn Vahl leads Paragon Warsuits. One unit of them is very hard to go wrong with in just about any army list. They're some of the most reliable things to destroy tanks, monsters and vehicles, and can pretty much do a number on anything else too. The Paragon Warsuits get their own boosted special rule, and then Morvenn Vahl allows you to reroll the hit roll and wound roll, just making them terrifically general purpose. They should be hitting and wounding just about anything in the game most of the time. On top of that, she's got a pretty punchy melee profile herself. If you can spare a junk miracle dice, then you're able to get her up to 8 attacks with Fidelis, and when those attacks are coming with the Paragon Warsuit buff and her own rerolls built in, they're also going to cause a massive amount of damage. They've got devastating wounds as well, so she'll be able to punch through a few invulnerable saves. With all that damage, she might well generate some miracle dice as well with her Righteous Repugnant special rule. Overall, a pretty standout unit and getting better in Hallowed Martyrs. A pretty awesomely powerful model just to have stand straight back up on death, and potentially even get the detachment benefit rules when she does so, coming back for one last turn of absolutely enormous damage dealing. As with the Paragon Warsuits, I've given her a 5 out of 5. Very hard to go wrong with. I've given her a 2 out of 3 for the overall model and lore feeling for her. A nice enough centerpiece unit, but maybe not one of the absolute picks of my favourite ones for the Sisters.
Morvenn Vahl is part of why the Hallowed Martyrs and Champions of Faith are doing so well, because she operates so well within these detachments. As soon as you're using the Champions of Faith and you want to extra kill an enemy, suffer not the unfaithful, and now all of your attacks, like the multi-melters, like the missiles from the Paragon Warsuits, get sustained hits 1, which you're fully rerolling because you have Vahl in the unit. Morvenn Vahl can give you miracle dice, though it is an awkward thing of her model needs to destroy the enemy unit rather than her unit destroying the enemy unit. Being able to get back up when you are a toughness 7 and 8 wound model, though that'll be reduced, with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, it's wonderful in the Hallowed Martyrs. And when she gets back up, oh, she's a lone character. Oh, that means that she gets the +1 to hit and wound from the Hallowed Martyrs detachment rule. Now she's extra angry and dangerous. I would always have her with the Paragon Warsuits. I wouldn't ever want to try and run her alone. Then she can go after tanks and monsters, And we don't really care about that +1 to wound from the detachment rule because you get that anyway from the Paragon Warsuits. Morvenn Vahl is the multiplier that makes the Paragon Warsuits go from doing quite a bit of damage to dealing immense damage. 5 out of 5 in gameplay, 1 out of 3 for model. It's a really nice centerpiece model. It has a lot of the similar problems I have with the Paragon Warsuits, but it's nice to see one of the High Lords of Terror, even if for some reason they think going on the front lines is the best option. That's not where your high-ranking leaders should be.
Next up, we've got Junith Eruita and her hover pulpit with some great big heavy flamers on it. I believe that's a souvenir from her defense of a great big basilica. For her stat line, she's a mounted keyword character with a fairly chunky defense, 8 wounds with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. That should give her a pretty reasonable chance of surviving, even if any squad that she happens to be leading is slain. And for Sisters characters doesn't do too badly for damage threat. A Twin Links Ministorum Heavy Flamer, plus a bunch of Strength 6, AB2 and Damage 2 attacks, may be enough to skirmish with some lighter objective scorers. Her biggest and most impactful special rule is generating a command point. You gain a CP at the start of the command phase, though you do need to pass a leadership test to do so. I believe it equates to around about 3 out of every 4 times she should generate one, and then beyond that she also gives a -1 to hit for her unit as well. I feel like between the command point generation and her own profile, I feel like she does enough to warrant inclusion. The Sisters don't exactly have access to the most command point generation. Maybe she could rustle up some command points for the first few turns before committing to the fight on the mid-board a little later on. Overall, I feel like she's got some fairly good value between those two things. I've given her a 4 out of 5 for in-game strength, maybe particularly nice in Hallowed Martyrs with the option to jump up again like Morvenn Vahl can. And for lore and cool factor, I've given her a 2 out of 3. I do quite like the eagle pulpit, though maybe the way it flies looks a little bit curious to me.
You know, you can also spend a miracle dice to guarantee that you get the command point from Junith. But she has decent leadership, so it usually is worth the roll. While she is good in the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, she is very good in the Army of Faith because that is a detachment that is hungry for command points. Through the stratagems, you can turn those command points into miracle dice. Junith Eruita is okay in combat, her heavy flamer is nice, you can put her with a squad of Dominions or Battle Sisters with more flame weapons for a good overwatch, or you can have her work alone, then her toughness 5 comes in instead of using the bodyguard's toughness 3. Because it's Battle Sisters, it's always toughness 3. She works pretty well, but other characters like the Canoness can guarantee a cheaper stratagem. But if you already have one Canoness of one kind or another, because their ability can only be used once per battle round across the army, Junith is a great choice. You could have Junith with Sacresants, because they really like the -1 to hit, which goes with their unit ability of -1 to be wounded, but the Hospitaller is cheaper and gives a better Fear No Pain. And we can't double up on characters except in Battle Sister squads. Junith is good, a 4 out of 5, and for lore and the model, I would say a 2 out of 3. I'm not happy with the bias in the rankings of the saint names that are going up the back on the stairs. And it is nice in this edition you can take these characters regardless of which order they are connected to, since half the characters are Martyred Lady anyway.
Next up we have the living saint herself in Saint Celestine, one of the first of the more recent wave of Sisters models, coming back with the Triumvirate of the Imperium back in 7th edition, and she can swoop around the board as a great avenging angel alongside her 2 Gemini, and her main trick is to be able to revive from death, getting up on a 2+ after she's been knocked down the first time. Fast and fairly threatening models with that ability tend to be really quite interesting in 40k, as it might give you a pretty reasonable chance of another activation, potentially putting down another light infantry threat after her own squad's been wiped out. Between her and her Gemini, she's got an alright damage profile, strength 6 and damage 2 on her main attacks with devastating wounds, plus backed up by a few power weapon attacks. It's a profile that could be alright at skirmishing against lighter things that would really struggle against bigger tough monsters and vehicles. If she wants to hit a bit harder, she could join the Zephyrim, and then their datasheet rules could apply to her. You could make really quite a fast and threatening squad there, though it is likely to be quite an expensive one for how easy the models are to take down. Finally, her last special rule is to allow you to regenerate some bodyguards, D3 slain ones getting healed with her healing tiers each turn. So if the opponent doesn't quite manage to wipe out the squad for whatever reason, he could have it bounce back in quite a big way, including if Celestine herself is taken down and then heals her Gemini in the next command phase. Overall, I feel like she's really quite an interesting datasheet. I've chosen to give her a 3.5 out of 5 for in-game strength here. I feel like she's got a lot of interesting utility, that really does pay for that utility with not having quite so much damage output for the big 160 points. I'd say more usable as opposed to hugely standout. For lore, model and cool factor though, it's got to be a 3 out of 3. One of the most iconic Sisters of Battle units, and again, like the Seraphim, I do really like the entire Avenging Angel vibe. Where I did a recent video where people were ranking their favourite miniatures for each army, she came out on top for the Sisters, now really beating out the Triumph.
The problem with Saint Celestine is she doesn't give her unit more, just slow resurrection, which really requires a unit of 10. And now that the Canoness with Jump Pack exists, again, because we had a Canoness with Jump Pack in 2nd edition, but not in between, now that the Canoness with Jump Pack is there, they are a better choice, certainly with Seraphim, but also with Zephyrim. You can put Celestine with the Zephyrim, then you get the bonuses on all the weapons, and sustained hits and devastating wounds with her big sword is very good. But a Canoness will do just as well. And a Canoness with Jump Pack and 5 Zephyrim is slightly cheaper than Celestine herself. So I run Celestine alone, and then we have wound shenanigans. Because she is a character but not in an attached unit, you can allocate attacks to Celestine, and then the Feel No Pain of the Gemini will activate. Because the character abilities, where you're assigning wounds to character models, that only applies in attached units. So she's much more durable, and when she goes down, then she may, probably, almost certainly, get back up. Because of some shenanigans, I give her a 4 out of 5 in gameplay terms, and as a model, it's a 3 out of 3. She doesn't use a flight stand, and when you pet her on the head, she bounces, because she's been a good girl. She's great for car dashboards as a bobblehead alternative.
Talking of rather spectacular fun centerpiece models, we've got the Triumph of St. Catherine, the rather awesome and unusual funeral procession for 235 points, basically a whole little diorama with 6 sisters bearing the different relics of their orders, and a bunch of swooping cherubs overhead. The Triumph has a pretty massive and really quite complicated data sheet, having 6 different buffs that you can choose 2 of each turn, plus the ability to make your miracle dice into some automatic 6s that, unlike previously, they don't just flat out generate 1 anymore. The special rule combos can have all sorts of interesting effects. Things like +2 to move or +1 to advance and charge could be excellent for springboarding some special weapon assaults, or even making charges out of deep strike more likely. There's nice easy reroll wound rolls of 1 at range, which can feed into any sort of firepower units that don't already have that. Extra AP and melee is an interesting enough buff as well. And pretty well all of these can apply to their own profiles as well. It's got an interesting 18 wound profile with a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, so it takes at least some volume fire to chew through, and the relic weapons, while only being damage 1 and lowish strength, can still pack a punch. 18 attacks hitting on a 2+ at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 1 should easily be enough to bully infantry, so potentially after a turn or 2 of buffing from some safety, could commit to the fight mid-board. Overall, I feel like the data sheet's really quite a fun and interesting one. Some of the changes they made in the codex seem like fairly nice ones too. I just feel like at the moment that 235 points is still way more than it really should be. It went up to 250 when you could generate the automatic 6 miracle dice, which felt like the main staple of its value, and then reined that in quite a bit, but didn't really decrease the points cost to compensate. I'd still say even at that high points cost it's playable, definitely some interesting combos, unusual things that you can't really get anywhere else in the codex, though I just feel like a more balanced points cost for it, or perhaps taking off a good 20 or 30 points or so, I feel like that would tempt a lot more people. For fun model cool factor though, I've got to give it a 3 out of 3. Very few factions get quite such a cool centerpiece diorama to have in the middle of an army, and I quite like the attention to detail with the different sisters' orders being represented.
The Triumph of St. Catherine was a staple of so many armies. Great after the Codex launch. The Fiery Hearts ability is probably the best one. +2 inches to the move and +1 to all charge rolls. But it is very expensive, even with a recent 15 points reduction. The Miracle Dice power is not as good as it once was, as rather than getting a 6, you change the Miracle Dice you get at the start of the battle round into a 6. I found that is very necessary when playing Penitent Host, because if you don't have a 6, you can't make the charge, and if you can't make the charge in the Penitent Host, you don't do damage. Outside of that detachment, we're pretty well served on speed through the Bringers of Flame, and the other detachments do alright with particular speedy units like the Seraphim and like the tanks. What we have to remember is that the relics apply to Adeptus Sororitas units, and that includes itself. So the Triumph of St. Catherine alone can be incredibly speedy, rush up the board, and strike with AP -3 swords. The points are what undoes a lot of its strength. So it's a 3 out of 5 for gameplay, but 3 out of 3 for lore and the model. And you don't have to have all of the attendants around the model when you build it, so there you have a bunch of great character models for the rest of your army, because we kit bash, we alternate, we use proxies, we do not buy expensive character models from Games Workshop.
Next up, we've got the Daemonifuge, Ephrael Stern, the Anathema to Chaos, and her Harlequin bodyguard Kaiganil, who seems to have snuck into a rather fanatical Imperial Codex somehow. They're a speedy lone operative model with an 8-inch move and deep strike. Between the two of them, for 85 points, at least compared with some other lone operative models out there, they're at least fairly hard to take down, with their wounds spread out over 2 models with a 4+ invulnerable save. And between the two of them, they do have enough damage to skirmish with some lighter enemy units out there. Ephrael has a bunch of strength 6 and damage 2 attacks, and Kaiganil has some strength 4, damage 1. They both have precision if there happens to be a light character that they could credibly kill. Otherwise, they might have the chance to deal some mortal wounds, but it feels maybe a bit disappointing just how unreliable that is, focusing on the enemy failing a battle shock test, and they get to use heroic intervention for free, which occasionally could be big if it could trigger into something meaningful, as they do have fights first. But I feel like free heroic intervention is one of the ones that just tends to be a bit more situational, and with their damage profiles, I'm just not really sure they've got that much threats to be able to jump in and actually kill something that's striking, at least not unless it's an enemy damage dealer that's incredibly fragile. Overall, for utility value, fast-moving lone operatives tend to have good value in 40k though, screening off areas of the board that you can't interact with them, doing secondary objectives, and still have some threats when it comes to actually try and skirmish with the enemy. I say if you wanted to add a unit to the Sisters to do that though, you might be better off with a Calidus Assassin, warping around the board and doing secondaries pretty easily. Overall, I've given them a 3.5 out of 5. I say usable but not standout. I've given them a 2 out of 3 for model and cool factor. I feel like they're pretty fun and unusual sculpts, though again maybe not quite on the same level as things like Celestine and the Triumph for me.
Having Deep Strike on a unit that costs about the same points as Seraphim, but with a smaller base size, and because there's only 2 models instead of 5, you can fit into a lot of smaller places to complete those secondary missions. They have precision. Precision is okay. And against Chaos units in particular, where you get anti-Chaos 2+ melee attacks, that's against any Chaos creature, monsters, vehicles, characters, possessed. It works on all of them. But it's a bit too specific. However, this unit is really, really good in the Hallowed Martyrs because we can hide behind a unit, heroically intervene for free, fight first with precision to maybe kill some characters, and then we use Suffering and Sacrifice to make Kaiganil the punching bag of Angron or whatever big monster is there. They really hate Kaiganil in particular. Maybe they accidentally kill Ephrael Stern at the same time, but she can get back up. That's what Divine Intervention will do. However, the Jump Canoness is 10 points cheaper and does a lot of similar things. In Hallowed Martyrs is how we go, and I had a lot of fun in Nakamud Gauntlet, the Crusade book, for Deep Strike shenanigan extra fun rules. 4 out of 5 for gameplay, 1 out of 3 for the model. I'm not super keen on the Marilyn Monroe upskirt, and getting the only named Harlequin character only makes it worse. As a character, Kaiganil can be your warlord. I hate that. Never do that.
Finally, for our look through the epic heroes, we've got Aestred Thurga and Agathae Dolan, a pair of named characters bearing the rather fun named Auto Tapestry of the Emperor's Judgment, and her soothsayer counterpart Agathae. The standard gives you devastating wounds in a unit, probably most interesting on the Celestian Sacresants, given that they're the scariest melee squad that they can join, and then they do chip in with some alright melee damage with a few strength 5 and damage 2 attacks, maybe nothing crazy to write home about. Agathae might help out with some miracle dice generation as well. If you wipe out a unit, then you gain a miracle dice, and you gain more if she dies. Overall though, the Sisters of Battle have a lot of interesting character leaders for Celestian Sacresants and other units. I feel like for the 85 points they just don't really make the cut compared with the rest. Devastating Wounds is definitely an interesting ability, and they maybe add a little bit more defense to the squad, adding 2 models rather than 1, but I still rate them pretty low in the hierarchy of characters that you might want to add to a unit. I've given them a 2 out of 5 for in-game strength, and a 1.5 out of 3 for the model feel and cool factor. They maybe just feel a little bit more on the extraneous side, feeling like a bit of a bonus release for the Sisters of Battle that didn't really come out to all that much fanfare.
So you like Devastating Wounds? That's a really good ability because it ignores the armor save of enemies and invulnerable saves, and unlike in the Index, it now works on all of the weapons in the unit. Ranged weapons, melee weapons together. So Sacresants are a good choice, but I've also tried the pair a few times in the Champions of Faith with Dominions carrying Stormbolters. And then you can use Suffer Not the Unfaithful for sustained hits, and 4 of your Dominions now have 4 shots at damage 2. It works okay, but you're relying on rolling sixes, which I know is a lot of people's plan in 40k. As soon as you're adding Aestred and Agathae to a unit, you can no longer fit in an Immolator, because 5+2 is larger than the carrying capacity of 6. But they're a great pair to give you more Miracle Dice if you're not playing a Miracle Dice heavy detachment. You get bonus Miracle Dice when Agathae dies. Oh, it's a Hallowed Martyrs, you bring her back, she dies again, that's even more Miracle Dice. And you get even more Miracle Dice for every enemy unit destroyed. A little bit of overkill is worth it. 3 out of 5 for gameplay. For lore, I would give them a 2 out of 3. It's not amazing to have a battle standard bearer because we're not playing Warhammer Fantasy / Warhammer the Old World, but it's nice to see some representation of the Order Prenatus. They are the specialists that work on banners and tapestries and protecting relics. Not to be confused with the Ordo Fenostratus, which deals with protecting stained glass windows and stopping people from falling through them.
Next up, we're moving on to the generic characters for the sisters. And first up, let's start with the generic HQ for the faction, the Canoness, leading the order into battle with Faith and Fury. She's an interesting model with a whole ton of options, loads of different datasheet equipment choices, and a seriously interesting special rule giving you the discounted stratagems. And between all that, she's going to have quite a lot of different applications that you could really use her for in different attachments. If you've got damage dealer stratagems, she could be tempting for the Celestian Sacresants if you're not going for a Hospitaller or something to lead them. And she can be made really quite fighty with her Blessed Blade as well, with some lethal hits and a fairly good damage profile, that maybe has some rivalry with the Palatine for the best damage combos there. For other options, with a Rod of Office, she can grant reroll hit rolls of 1. That's quite a nice one if you want her more leading the unit as opposed to dealing damage herself, and does have other unusual options as well, such as the Null Rod to ward off against psychic attacks. Even if her bodyguard's shot down and she's on her own, she could be interesting to survive with a 2+ invulnerable save once per game, and perhaps more so than most other sisters characters. Between that and Hallowed Martyrs to be able to revive on death, you could have a model that's just seriously hard to take down for multiple turns in a row. Could be seriously annoying, as well as forcing the opponent to attack you. I'm sure Christian will be far better informed as to the specific combos and different attachments than me, but she seems like an all-around strong unit, seems to feature in a massive amount of competitive lists. I'd give her a 4.5 for in-game strength, and I've given her a 2 out of 3 for lore model and cool factor. Quite nice with the different equipment options, and nothing wrong with the standard Sisters leader model.
The Canoness is wonderful for getting you cheaper stratagems. You're in the Army of Faith. Oh, I fancy some extra points of armor penetration. Let's have Divine Guidance. Oh, you're shooting at me? Oh, I don't want to get shot. Blinding Radiance. Now you're -1 to hit me. Very nice reflexive abilities. And in the Hallowed Martyrs, she goes down and then she resurrects herself for free on death, as that stratagem goes from 1 command point to 0 command points. In the Champions of Faith, she's a great leader for Sacresants and giving out those combat stratagems. And with the good Rod of Office, you can reroll hit rolls of 1. Or you can have a Blessed Blade instead for higher strength and lethal hits. She is a difficult model to figure out from the datasheet and the model which actual combinations of things you have, and so many people make mistakes with them. You cannot have a Blessed Blade and a Rod of Office. It has to be a Rod of Office and a Power Sword. She can wander off alone and just have that 2+ invulnerable save, and be an absolute pain to shift. The difficulty with the invulnerable save is you have to declare it at the start of the phase, so the enemy will know if you're going to use it or not. So you're going to bait them and be like, oh, maybe I'll shoot you. Maybe I won't use the ability. No, I'm going to use the ability. And then they don't shoot you, but that's fine. You survived just by using that special rule, without ever having to roll any dice. She's a 5 out of 5 for gameplay terms, very useful in a lot of detachments, and in the Penitent host can be made to join Repentia if you so wished. There are other better choices though. For lore and the model, because of the odd choices of left and right hand and what combinations you can build from the model, she's a 1 out of 3. And because the monopose model is no longer sold, the monopose model being the only way to get the Rod of Office, we have some future difficulties coming. How are we going to have a Rod of Office if the model isn't sold with a Rod of Office anymore?
Next up, we've got the counterpart in the skies with the Jump Pack. Quite a nice return to the roster for the 10th edition model for the Sisters. It did feel like a miniature that the faction was missing, given that they had these in the past. The Jump Canoness can lead the Seraphim or Zephyrim, gives you the same discounted stratagem special rule, and once per game has a rage mode of a bunch of extra attacks, plus 3 attacks and devastating wounds for the model. And I feel like, at least compared with some Jump characters, Games Workshop's managed to make the weapon options at least fairly well balanced. at least all of them having damage 2 and trading out the attacks, and even the Handflamer one could be interesting with some Bringers of Flame Seraphim combos. At 75 points though, you are making really quite a big and expensive unit that's going to be very fragile and easy to take down. She could hit pretty hard with a Zephyrim unit, and otherwise I feel like maybe justifiable if you're going max Handflamers with Bringers of Flame, though beyond that maybe a bit on the niche side. I've not really seen so many people using jump Canonesses alongside Zephyrim as primary damage dealers recently, and if you're wanting utility units, I'd rather go for a full squad for a similar sort of price than fielding Canonesses solo. Overall though, I feel like she's usable if not crazily standout. I've given her a 3.5 out of 5 for in-game strength, and a 2 out of 3 for the lore and general feel of the model. I think it was quite a nice gap for Games Workshop to fill in the Sisters roster, maybe a little bit more important than some of the other special characters they've released them since their refresh.
I'm glad you remembered the 2nd edition Canoness with Jump Pack after I mentioned her. The Canoness with Jump Pack is a very good one for cheaper or free stratagems, especially in the Army of Faith, where those stratagems that are defensive, with defensive auras, come off Jump Pack units, and then Blinding Radiance now works on all models within 3 inches. All Adeptus Sororitas models. Not allied armages or like allied Deathwatch. The Canoness with Jump Pack still makes work in Bringers of Flame with that Cleansing Flame stratagem becoming 1 command point instead of the 2 it currently is. She can work with Zephyrim. You no longer need the power weapon to get the bonus of the Zephyrim for the sustained hits or the lethal hits, which means that whereas weapons were kind of balanced at the start, people don't take the Eviscerator unless they really like the Eviscerator. People generally take the big halberd. She can just fly around with that halberd hitting people. A lot of damage can be done, and so she can operate alone. Then you'll want a protective enhancement like the Mantle of Ophelia or the Iron Surplus. 3 wounds will mean she dies easily, but once per game she can hit really hard. The option of a small bodyguard unit of Zephyrim is there. Compared to the cheaper Canoness, that's where you think, which one of them do I want to have in the army? Because their Sacred Command ability is once per battle round across the army, and they both share the Sacred Command ability. What you can do with the Canoness with Jump Pack is in the Penitent Host attachment, have the Catechism of Divine Penitence as a Canoness keyword model. She can then join Repentia and make their charge easier. 4 out of 5 for usefulness on the table, and I think 3 out of 3 for lore and coolness, and a nice model with a few good options.
Next up, we've got the Sister Battle Lieutenant in the Palatine, a fairly straightforward lesser HQ model giving you lethal hits in a unit, which generally tends to be pretty good news for just about any of the Sister squads out there, most of them having low to mid strength. Melter Guns certainly appreciate lethal hits when they're wounding on 5s, and could be handy enough for Sacresants with the halberds if desired as well. Beyond that, she gets a plasma pistol and a few attacks with a Palatine blade, maybe a slightly unassuming strength 4 profile. With the datasheet rule, she can generate a fair few mortal wounds with rapturous blows for some extra damage, getting 1 extra 1 for each successful wound. She's a really common one to use the Helen Martin enhancement through Suffering Strength. That gives you 1 extra attack, 1 pip of strength, and 1 extra damage, and that hits quite a lot of nice breakpoints. Getting to strength 5 means that you might get more mortal wounds as well, and that's a detachment that supports melee and characters really well on top of that, with further options to resurrect from death, fight on death, or reroll or hit rolls potentially. Between all that, she can be a pretty savage damage threat in her own right for a fairly cheap points cost, never mind any other benefits that she has from the squad that she's leading. Between all that, I've given her a 4.5 out of 5 for in-game strength, a pretty flexible and useful character that you could use in multiple different ways. For the lore and mini, I've given her 1.5 out of 3. Just feels a little bit too close to more standard Battle Sisters to me compared with other characters out there, and does feel a bit painful for the price that Games Workshop charges for her if you want the official model.
The Palatine is the Battle Sister Lieutenant. She leads mission-sized armies, which is about platoon level. And the Palatine will smash. This is the place you put the miracle dice. If you can wound the enemy, you can do terrible things to the enemy. Anything that increases her attacks makes her much better. So be the Warlord in the Twist Lord of War card that's 3 more attacks. You can't do that if Morvenn Vahl is there, but otherwise it works. And any enhancements that increase attacks, like through Suffering Strength, are perfect for her. However, there's been an update to Mortal Wounds. So the Army of Faith, St. Eleanor's Blade, gives precision, and also an extra point of armor penetration, and also gives you miracle dice if you kill at least an enemy model. But because of that precision, you can now assign the mortal wounds to the enemy character. If you know you've caused enough mortal wounds to be able to kill the enemy character, assign the attacks to the bodyguard, and then the character will die anyway. And because you killed a model, you get that miracle dice. With lethal hits, which is great, it's great on any non-flamer unit. Battle Sisters, Repentia in the Penitent host, maybe Sacresants, but I prefer a Canoness or Hospitaller. And Novitiates, definitely Novitiates. Then she gets reroll to hit rolls of 1, or full rerolls to hit against enemies on objectives, but we're hitting on a 2+ anyway, so rerolls to 1 is enough. That means you can get more 6s, and because she's in a unit, that's a lethal hit, that's a wound, that is 1 more mortal wound to the enemy. 5 out of 5, no one has smashed better. As a model, 1 or a 2 out of 3, let's say 1.5. It's nice to have a returned model after the Palatine dropped after the Witch Hunter's Codex, but this model doesn't have a sword. Her big thing is the combat ability, and instead she's flinging around her rosary. Please convert your models to have a sword.
Next up, we've got the Tender Healing Administrations of the Hospitaller, the medic sister that can grant her squad a 5+ feel no pain, and then have really quite a serious healing ability as well to allow a squad to bounce back, either reviving 1 model for free, or if you can sacrifice a miracle dice, then it's a big D3+1, pretty massive that it could be, say, up to 4 Celestian Sacresants getting up from the grave. Between those, it seems that she's easily viable to add into a Celestian Sacresant unit, really popular at the moment with the Champions of Faith being good again, and the Feel No Pain adds another nice barrier to damage. You've already got a unit that's got a reasonable save and invulnerable save, a -1 to wound due to the character leading it, and then hopefully this could save a few Sacresants, at least against damage 1 attacks, though the Feel No Pain drops off against anything that's damage 2 or higher. Overall though, seems like she does enough to be viable. I've given her a 4 out of 5 as a result. Lots of people are playing with Celestian Sacresants right now, and for the model I've given her a 2.5 out of 3 as well. I do really quite the little mini medic diorama with the down sister. It just feels like a bit more next effort level compared with most of the other characters out there.
The Hospitaller is quite a few points, and they can struggle to be justified. They are half the points of a Battle Sister squad, but you don't get 50% healing. At least not if you don't have the miracle dice to bring back more than 1 model per turn, and yet the Hospitaller costs half the cost of a Battle Sister squad. She is very good. 5+ feel no pain, being able to resurrect models, as long as your unit survives, this is what we need to remain on the table. Battle Sisters die easily, which sucks. But they really need to be with the Sacresants. That is throwing more points at the Sacresants, but they need a character to function. -1 to wound from that Sacresant unit rule, then the Hospitaller gives a 5+ feel no pain, then you resurrect models. Much better on a bigger squad of 10. The Champions of Faith is what you need to make that combination work. And the Hospitaller's value goes way up in smaller games where it's less likely that your unit will be wiped out in one go. The Champions of Faith also really like smaller games, like around 1,000 points. By 1,500 points, they're less effective because of the limit to the number of units that you can make righteous. I think the Hospitaller is a 4.5 out of 5 in terms of gameplay, and I will give her a 3 out of 3 for the model. It's a really nice diorama model. It just depends if you really want a model that's really cool or you want a gaming piece. She's much more unusual as a gaming piece considering the different base size. And that brings up questions like, hey, is base size even relevant anymore? Do we care? I don't. But that just starts fights in the comments. Get in the comments. We need that engagement.
Next up, we've got the Sister's Great Icon Bearer in the Imagifier, another cheap support character with 3 wounds, costing a bit more of a premium though at 65 points versus the Hospitaller. Her buffing abilities are nice enough to have in the midst of a formation, allowing you to re-roll a dice for Slain Sisters units nearby to hopefully get a few more useful miracle dice, maybe some nice 6s. And then beyond that, she makes her squad tougher, giving you a 4+ invulnerable save and boosting the unit save to a 2+. It does genuinely mean that the squad that she's in gets quite a lot tankier, though at the same time not really tankier per point, given that you're already paying for the squad's value, and then 65 points is really quite a big character premium. So you basically made a squad that is harder to take out, but also costs way more as well. I've seen some people take them in competitive lists. I must admit it's not really a unit I particularly understand what they'll be trying to do with them, though maybe Christian might be able to shed a bit more light. I feel like the defensive ability is nice enough, though I'd probably rather have the Hospitaller. And for the model, I feel like it's a fairly fun battle standard. I've given it a 2 out of 3 for that.
So the Imagifier has 2 abilities. Both of them are used. One of them is an aura of getting better miracle dice from dead units, because the better miracle dice you have, the more the Battle Sisters can do. The 1s and 2s in this edition are near useless, especially the 1s unless you're throwing them into a Hospitaller, unless you're putting them into a Palatine. The higher the miracle dice you have, the better you can perform. The other ability to give a 2+ save to a unit is really valuable for keeping your sisters alive, and in the Bringers of Flame we have an Armor of Contempt called Shield of Aversion. So against AP -1, you stay at that 2+ save. You don't want them on Sacresants because it's a lot of points to give very little benefit to the Sacresants. And so because of the points difference compared to the Hospitaller, the Imagifier keeps losing out to that Hospitaller. They are quite a useful unit, but the Hospitaller is usually the better choice. 2 out of 5, let's say 2.5 out of 5. And for the model, I'm going to say 1 out of 3. I want a banner on my banner bearer. It's an Imagifier, so we need to look significantly different to a Simulacra Imperialis. And I don't think mini statue is the way to go. I would prefer big cool flag. Yes, I know that's like playing Warhammer Fantasy. But I also don't like that the sword on this model is not straight. It always looks like the pole is bent at the top. The model could have done better.
Next up, we've got the Litanies of the Dialogus. 40 points for a melee support sister, give you a once per game cancel battle shock to one unit within 12 inches, triggered at the start of any phase. It's maybe slightly unhelpful timing given that battle shock happens in the command phase, so not very relevant for objectives as you've already scored them before you have the chance to cancel the battle shock effect. It just makes rules like that just feel a little bit less impactful, even if it can be good for stratagems and things. The more impactful ability would be the Stirring Rhetoric that she can bring, and that allows you to automatically count a miracle dice as a 6 for her led unit, so it could perhaps be nice enough in a Battle Sister squad, maybe combining with some multi-melters for some excessive damage out of one unit. Otherwise, she can just be a cheap character at 40 points with a 4+ invulnerable save. Maybe could be alright for forcing units to attack them in Hallowed Martyrs perhaps. For in-game strength, she just feels maybe a little bit more niche compared with other characters that give more direct buffs, even if that flip to a 6 roll is pretty impactful. I'm sure could have some interesting combos. For the model and cool factor, I've given her a 1.5 out of 3. I'm maybe not quite the biggest fan of the model sculpt compared with some of the rest, though I guess you could maybe kit bash out of some Novitiate parts or something.
The Dialogus is also Leadership 6+, one better than like all of our Battle Sister infantry. Better leadership is underrated. If you pass a leadership test, you can score primary. And for her ability to undo Battle Shock, I am liking it a bit more. It's not for primary missions on turns 2, 3, and 4, but it's for secondary missions, because many of those are scored at the end of the turn. Battle-shocked units can't complete actions. Battle-shocked units are excluded from scoring behind enemy lines. The Dialogus is the cheapest character if you want to have a character running around completing actions and secondary missions, and they make the miracle dice work. If you are cursed with bad miracle dice, you will always get a miracle dice of a 6. In the Army of Faith, that means 2 miracle dice becoming a 6. That is how you can automatically hit with a multi-melter both shots when overwatching. Or you can get a guaranteed hit and then a guaranteed wound, and then all you need to do is roll the damage, assuming the enemy fails their save. Or you can change that damage to a 6. It also means that if your unit needs to get into combat, and it is, say, Celestian Sacresants, that's the cheapest character to activate the Sacresant rule, and their charge roll can be d6 plus 6 because you're using a miracle dice which becomes a 6. Really useful. She can hang alone in the Champions of Faith with an aura of no deep strike allowed. That's a Sanctified Amulet. But it really, the biggest boost is to the Army of Faith, as each act of faith becomes a 6. She's a 4 out of 5 in gameplay terms because of such a versatile use. The model is a 2 out of 3. It's an okay model. I think you're much better off doing, as we said, converting your own from Novitiates, or if you're watching in 2026, one of the Celestian Insidiants.
Finally, for the more mainline sister support characters, we've got the Dogmata. Not really given the best rules treatment by Games Workshop in 10th edition. She's 45 points, so is a fairly cheap one. At least compared with some of the more cheap support characters, she hits a little harder in melee. 4 attacks at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 2. Unfortunately, just compared with the rest, she just doesn't really add much special. -1 leadership within 6 inches is pretty niche. Just kind of rare that you meet all the conditions where that's actually going to tip the balance compared with not. and then otherwise she adds +1 to the OC of the unit. Again, not absolutely awful, and could allow you to maybe swarm a central objective with some Sacresants or something just that tiny bit easier. But there's a good chance that you might well have taken that objective anyway, unless your opponent had, say, exactly more than 10 OC, and you're banking on both your squad and your opponent's squad surviving any combat to be able to make it useful. Overall, just maybe a bit more disappointing that she didn't get some more rewritten rules in the Codex. I've given her a 1 out of 5 for in-game strength. I just feel like you're better off with just about any other character for the vast majority of units. For the model, I feel like it's generally been considered one of the less popular Sisters sculpts out there. I'm not sure I dislike it quite as much as some, though I would give it a 1.5 out of 3, and not rate as one of the more exciting looking support characters.
The Dialogus improves leadership, is cheaper, and gives you better miracle dice, whereas the Dogmata costs 5 points more than the Dialogus. She would have a place in, like, the Champions of Faith, if including her in a unit gave the unit some kind of special keyword, like the way the Biosanctic Brood Surge makes a unit work as long as they have a Biophagus attached. Sometimes I talk about Genestealer Cult, I'm also a Genestealer Cult channel. It's a weird mix. In the Army of Faith, you can give her the Divine Aspect. Stacking with her -1 leadership, enemies that fail a Battleshock test will give up a miracle dice and be Battleshocked, but you need to be within 6 inches for that. Objective Control 3 Battle Sisters is nice, but at the cost of nearly half a Battle Sister unit, it's not great. You could give her some combat enhancements, but any that can go on her are better on the Palatine or the Canoness, who costs 5 points more. The Dogmata should be 35 or at most 40 points. Even if she was made Penitent with the Penitent keyword, the Preacher does what the Dogmata does, but better in every way that matters. She gets a 1 out of 5 for gameplay because technically she can do something. The model is a 1 out of 3. It's a pretty standard standing sister. She has manacles on her back, and her role in the lore is to guide the new sisters, like the Novitiates, and punish the unworthy, like the Repentia. In the game, she cannot join Novitiates or Repentia. The model doesn't match the rules that you use on the table. I dislike that. So 1 out of 3.
Lastly, for the Core Sisters Codex, we've got the Ministorum Priest, a Zealot Firebrand leader for the Emperor's Faithful. And in game, that's realised as a support character that allows you to add +1 to your wound rolls, plus having a little bit of personal threat as well with that Zealot's Vindictor, a nice extra Ministorum Flamer profile in the unit, and then some Strength 5 and Damage 2 attacks in melee, which you can amp up once per game for 3 extra attacks, and all hitting at Strength 8. For adding damage to units, the +1 to wound could probably be most interesting with the Arco Flagellants perhaps. That does make their very blendy mass volume melee able to stack some more saves on really tough stuff. And maybe could be more interesting in the Penitent host. I'll let Christian handle that one. Overall, it does feel like maybe a bit of an overinvestment for the Arco Flagellants, which work pretty well just off their own datasheet steam. 50 points is quite a bit. Overall, I've given them a 3 out of 5 between their own melee threat and range damage, plus the +1 to wound. I'll give them a 2 out of 3 for the overall fun factor. I do quite like the Zealot's Vindictor one.
The Ministorum Priest is very good for supporting the Arco Flagellants. They can't join Sacresants, who would really enjoy their presence, and they can attach to the newer Sanctifiers unit. Then the unit gets sustained hits in combat. But the Sanctifiers should be run as more of a shooting flamer unit. Having a Ministorum Priest with a Vindictor is 1 more flamer, but it's a lot more points. +1 to wound is good. You need the right combat unit for that. You could potentially add them to Novitiates, but the Novitiate's role isn't to cause damage in melee, unless you have a Palatine. Though if you add the Ministorum Priest to a Novitiate unit, he can still infiltrate with them. Adding a Ministorum Priest to non-Arco Flagellant units, like the Sanctifiers, like the Novitiate Dominions or Battle Sisters, will give them the Penitent keyword. That gives them a bit more use in the Penitent host. So the Penitent keyword is applying just to that Ministorum Priest model, but also this is now a Penitent unit. The unit won't get the benefit of the detachment rule, but for stratagems like Boundless Zeal, they are now a Penitent keyword unit, so they can fall back and shoot and charge. You always have to be careful whether it's Penitent model or Penitent unit that it's applying to. I would give them a 3 out of 5. They have become far less useful in the Codex compared to the Index, where we were going in and smashing with a lot of Arco Flagellants. And for the models, because there are multiple models, I would say 1 out of 3. I like both of the models from Blackstone Fortress that represent the Ministorum Priest, as well as the Ministorum Priest model that you get in the Sanctifiers box. Sanctifiers are 9 models plus the Ministorum Priest, that's how they're sold. I don't like that we have to have just one or the other. I would like a multi-part Ministorum Priest with options for the different weapons. Unfortunately, the Zealot's Vindictor is just the better one.
Finally, last but not least, let's get into the Legends of the Adeptus Sororitas. Not available for tournament play, though usable everywhere else for casual games. The sisters have acquired a few more of these as the edition's gone on, as with Games Workshop tending to phase out units. Starting out, we've got the Repressor, a unique Forge World transport, going back a very long way for the sisters at this point. And for 130 points, you basically get a Toughness 10 Rhino chassis vehicle with 12 wounds. It can have a little bit of firepower with a twin heavy flamer, has a big firing deck for 6 models to be able to fire out, maybe not the worst for things like Retributors or Dominions perhaps, and then further supports ranged units a bit more with a combat embarkation. When units are charged, they can jump back into it, kind of similar to the Space Marine Repulsor. I feel like its data sheet does have some interesting rules, though as with a lot of Legends things, it is kind of spectacularly points costed to the point where it just doesn't balance well with things like the excellent Immolator or the cheap and durable Rhino. I'd give it a 1.5 out of 5 for in-game strength, and for lore and gameplay feel, I've given it a 2 out of 3. I guess it's just always interesting to see classic models like this take to the tabletop.
I really like Legends rules. I like that it exists. I like that Games Workshop doesn't just say, we're not selling this model anymore, so we're no longer going to have rules for it. Even though that's sort of what they did for Celestians with Guns, even though Celestians with Guns can still be built out of the Battle Sisters box. Anyway, Repressors are kind of fun. It's there to keep the Battle Sisters safe. But with a heavy flamer, a twin heavy flamer, and 6 sisters inside that can shoot out, you could carry a full Dominion squad or Sanctifiers and Scout, or with a Preacher, because of the Dominion rule, and the Preacher also gains Scout from the Preacher rule. It's a lot of fire and a lot of fun. It's very useful in the Bringers of Flame detachment, because there you can get out and do more damage, and Dominions can reactive move back inside if the enemy moves close, or because of the Repressor special rule, if the enemy tries to charge you, you hop back inside, and then next turn you can carry on and do more Bringers of Flame shenanigans. The Immolator is more valuable and the Rhino is much cheaper, so it's a 2 out of 5 in gameplay terms, but a 2 out of 3 for model and lore. They should come back, and also as an Imperial Agents unit, so that the Arbitrae's police force can use them, because in the lore, they use Repressors. That would be cool.
Next up we have the Sisters Battle Sanctum, a fortification that was briefly in the Codex and then taken out, and basically consists of some all very holy shattered ruins, and the rather spectacular shrine statue that recently came back as part of Kill Team terrain this edition. Unfortunately, being both a fortification and also a Legends unit, it maybe gets a bit of a double dose of neglect from Games Workshop. A rather spectacular 170 points, and for that benefit it basically allows you to do an extra act of faith with infantry units that are within range of it. Beyond that, it just sits there being rather durable, and I guess can potentially allow a bit more cover for sisters in the deployment zone. For in-game strength, it's a 1 out of 5 for me, basically about as low value as you can possibly get. I'll give it 2 out of 5 for model and cool factor. I do really quite like that shrine statue. It did seem to be a pretty good selling point of the recent Kill Team box set.
If you have absolutely no terrain, and you're going into a battle knowing there will be absolutely no terrain, maybe you want a Battle Sanctum so you can have some cover. It's awful. You can have 1 additional act of faith per phase, or you could just play the Army of Faith. It's a lot of points to do a lot of nothing. Games Workshop doesn't know what to do with fortifications. There's no guns on this, there's no holy light laser, the statue doesn't slap people. It gets a 0 out of 5 for me, which I think is the lowest we can actually go. The model, I'll give a 2 out of 3. I'm okay with the shrine. It would be nicer if it was fully intact, and the statue is okay if you like bare feet and people that look like Celestine. Maybe Greyfax has this model in their alcove.
Next up, we've got the Crusader Squad. These guys were taken out of the Sisters Codex alongside the Astra Militarum when their codexes came out for 10th edition. Basically Ministorum Zealots with some fancy shields and power swords, and available in really quite small units if you want them. It's 40 points for 2 of them, or 80 points for 4. At the 40 points cost, that's really quite a cheap utility unit. They're not going to do an enormous amount. They do have 2 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save, so take a tiny bit of volume fire to take down, and have a few power sword attacks for a bit of melee. Maybe their biggest value, if anything, would be for a small interference unit, maybe doing things like secondary objectives or screening, maybe forcing the opponents to pile all attacks into them in Hallowed Martyrs as an alternative to the 3-model Arco Flagellants. I'll give them a 3 out of 5 for gameplay. Small units have some value all of their own in Warhammer 40k. Once more, I'll give them a 2 out of 3 for the overall feel of them. I did quite like the classic miniatures for these guys. I wonder if Games Workshop will eventually get round to releasing an updated set.
Crusaders are a weird unit because people think of Legends as a thing that a unit is sent to, disposed of, and ignored. When the Crusaders went into Legends, they also got a revamp. They got 2 wounds, whereas they previously had 1, and the Celestian Sacresants are lingering on 1 wound. They are now way better in terms of profile than their index. They are also a little bit more expensive, but they're cheap. They have an invulnerable save. 2 models with 2 wounds is better than 1 character with 4 wounds because they can't be taken out by a single las cannon shot. These are good units. And Crusaders are the cheapest bodyguard protectors of the Triumph of St. Katherine. For UC, any character that can join a Battle Sister squad is the rule on which characters the Crusaders can join. As the Battle Sisters can be joined by the Triumph of St. Katherine, 2 Crusaders could join the Triumph of St. Katherine instead. That's a very cheap ablative extra wounds when those las cannon shots start firing at the Triumph. 4 out of 5 for shenanigans and funness and good use on the tabletop. The medal models are okay, and the slightly newer Blackstone Fortress model also looks perfectly fine. There are 2 out of 3.
Next up, we've got the Death Cult Assassins. They were the other small units taken out of the Sisters Codex when the 10th edition one came around, and I'll admit I've only just learnt they've gained Lone Operatives since then. As with the Crusaders, it looks like they had a rules revamp. As a result, they're now 2 models for 55 points, 4 for 110, and for the 55 points you get a 2-model unit, each with 2 wounds and a 5+ invulnerable save, a bunch of fights first attacks hitting on a 2+ with some precision with those power blades, and they might actually genuinely have some threat against some character models, given that they get 2 reroll wound rolls against character datasheets. They also have the Infiltrator keyword as well, which is particularly interesting for the Sisters of Battle, given that the only other main Infiltrator option are the Novitiates, who cost far more. And between all that, they have a whole ton of interesting utility use. Cheap lone operatives that move fast are always interesting enough in the first place. The enemy can't interact with them at long range, and they do cost quite a bit less than the Daemonifuge. For their cheap cost though, they are just extra fragile if the opponent catches up with them, and they don't have masses of damage. I've given them a 4 out of 5 for in-game power between Lone Operative and Infiltrate. They certainly have some rivalry with the last miniature on this list though. For the models and fun factor, I've given them a 1.5 out of 3. Maybe no enormously strong feelings on them from my part. Interesting enough, inquisitorial agents that do have some fun factor.
Models with Lone Operative are perfect for missions and holding objectives, even out in the open. And they can infiltrate, if nothing else, to stop enemy infiltrators. Sort of cheaper than 5 Novitiates, because you also need to buy an Immolator to split a unit of 10 Novitiates into 2 squads of 5 Novitiates. They have a lot of rules. They can reroll wounds against characters, but with 1 damage and strength 4, they might get lucky and hurt some characters, like Renegade Imperial Guard officers. They're, okay, because you're comparing them to 3 Arco Flagellants or 2 Crusaders, which are cheaper, and they are the other really obvious objective completers. And Aveline, the last character we're going to talk about, is cheaper and also has Lone Operative. There are 3 out of 5, and you can get the model in the Sanctifiers kill team or the Euclidean Starstriders, as well as the older metal models, which are based on 2 characters from the Inquisitor scale game. I'll give them a 2 out of 3 for the models.
And then finally, for the newest entry in the Sisters of Battle Legend section, we have Celestian Sacresant Aveline. She was a fun Black Library miniature release alongside her novel, and I feel like out of the Black Library release miniatures, which are often quite fun miniatures, she's particularly stand out. A pretty fun centerpiece with her sword bursting into flame and taking the Sisters of Battle sort of fleur-de-lis style symbol, stomping a bloodletter head into the dirt, and cherub assistants hovering around. Interesting to see some representation of a sister from a different order as well. In game, she's perhaps got surprisingly generous rules. A Lone Operative at just 45 points, and when, as we just said, Lone Operatives just have all that huge value. Not being able to threaten or damage them until they get super close is a really big one. And then considering just how cheap she is, she's got a surprising amount of melee threat as well. The first time that she makes combat, she's going to be hitting with 7 attacks at Strength 5, AP 2, Damage 2 and Devastating Wounds. That's a stat line that certain much bigger and more high investment characters are going to be envious of, never mind having that on such a good utility model. She even gets better against demon style models if you happen to be playing against any of those. Overall, just enormous value all around. I feel like if they have released her with this datasheet and this points cost for tournament style games, she'd be a staple. I'm going to go as far to give her a full 5 out of 5 for value here. I think it's just kind of hard to go wrong with her in just about any list, between utility value and occasionally just charging in and cutting up some Space Marines for a turn. For the model, it's got to be a 3 out of 3 for me as well. I really do like the sculpt for this one and the mini diorama.
Celestian Sacresant Aveline, giving some representation to the Sacred Rose. She has a perfectly fine hand flamer. She has a very nice Thorn of the White Rose, which could be better considering it's a really super important relic. She's a lone operative who completes missions and has quite a bit of durability with 4 wounds, 3+ save, 4+ invulnerable save, and a 6+ feel no pain. She can slap a fool if need be, but being slightly cheaper than Death Cult Assassins, her main role is to score points. I have never been able to use her Demon Breaker ability, despite how many demons there are out there. Rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls would be very nice when combined with the Instrument of the Emperor's Wrath against something like a Demon Prince. But if you're ever facing Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Demons, obviously, or the Avatar of Cain, you can get those rerolls to hit and wound. A Canoness also works, and they can have enhancements, and they have that once per game 2+ invulnerable save. Or if you want to use the smashy part, a Canoness with a jump pack is a lot faster and can join units to boost them up and get stratagems for free. As a pretty good unit, but not the best compared to other characters like the Canonesses. A 4 out of 5. But a 3 out of 3 as a great model. Very fancy, really nice to paint, really hard to get the model, but really good if you can. But if you have them, use her rules.
So with the Legends units talked about, that just about rounds this one off before I look through the Sisters of Battle units. Hope you've enjoyed a talk through the Emperor's Faithful. It's been really special to be able to do so with a faction expert player such as Christian. As always, let me know your thoughts as to the units and their rankings down in the comments below. How would you rate them in your Sisters of Battle army at the moment? I look forward to hearing all your insights. As mentioned earlier, an absolutely massive thank you to Christian for joining me for this one. If you're a Sisters of Battle player, or a Genestealer cultist, or a Deathwatch player, and somehow you haven't found out about his channel so far, it'll be linked down in the video description below, and I'd absolutely recommend checking him out.
It's so nice of you to recommend me as the expert on Battle Sisters for the everyday viewer. Oh, look at that in the pinned comment. That's also a link to my channel. Maybe people should click it, and from there, click the subscribe button after watching some videos. I do help for all of the Battle Sister units, all of the Battle Sister detachments, Penitent Host pending, and I'm also available for one-on-one support through the link in my channel through Ko-fi. There you can get particular help with your army list, your style of play, and the units you have. Oh, congratulations Auspex on surviving 6 years on YouTube, as it is your 6-year anniversary on the 12th of September. I don't know if you even knew that. But you have done well today. You may rest. And I have a Big Sisters video right here that tells you a lot more about each unit that goes far beyond what we've discussed here. Have a great day of 40k.
In any case, that's just about it for this one. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more regular 40k content. I do tend to keep the videos coming out just about every day. Otherwise, check out the channel's Patreon page below if you'd like to help support. It is the main thing that supports my content creation. A big thank you to anyone doing so. Channel patrons get a few advantages such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.